Okay, so in this section, let's dive into what actually open payments is. So what is it and why does it matter? Basically, open payments enables applications to communicate directly with customers' accounts. And what we're doing here is we're sending payment instructions. So like I said, the whole Interledger protocol suite is not about actually moving money. It's about sending these payment instructions. Okay, so there's no need for these applications to become financial service providers, which is great news for them because that is quite a legal headache to jump through. So open payments can enable a distributed, federated, global payment ecosystem. It's a lot of big words and lofty ideas here, but the idea, I mean, this is the whole Interledger idea, is that we don't want a few players controlling everything about how our money is stored, how our money is transferred. You know, we want to break this up and free it. You know, you as an account holder should be able to say, who do you want to have access to your account, instead of the bank saying, oh, well, you know, every integration is such a legal headache and a technical headache. Like, we're only going to integrate with like X, Y, and Z, you know, so like those are your only options. Doesn't matter what you want. With open payments, everyone who adopts the standard just makes that integration much easier. And that actually gives the end user, I feel, a lot more power in the situation and choice, you know. And yeah, we can spread this globally. It will really open up those use cases about, you know, cross-border payments, cross-currency payments, and all the rest of those things. Open payments is great because there's no dependency on any specific account types or settlement systems. And from a developer's perspective, it's really nice and easy to build with open payments. You don't need to worry about any third-party payment processes. You can communicate directly with your customer's account as long as that is an open payments account. And that means you can write it in whatever programming language you want. Doesn't matter. It's just about, you know, the specification. We only care about what is the message that you are sending. So just to be clear, open payments is operating at the application layer, which means that it can be used on things like e-commerce websites or streaming services like Netflix or YouTube, or you could use it for a fundraising website, or basically any website where you care about money flowing one way or the other. Okay, so before we really dig into what open payments is, I think it would be really helpful to just go through a couple of terminology sections to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because I know you guys have a little bit of different technical backgrounds. So first of all, our definition of an account servicing entity is anything from a bank to a mobile money provider to a digital wallet provider. These are kind of licensed, regulated entities. You know, they have the compliance, they have the legal accredited financial service provider. Like, you know, these are the people who are actually moving money. They're actually managing customers' accounts. They're actually creating accounts. So they're either licensed to hold money or to transfer money. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about an account servicing entity or an ASE. Then what open payments is it's an API. So I just wanted to dive in quickly to what an API is. It's a application programming interface. Basically, all this means is that it defines how different services communicate with each other. So it's just sort of standardizing, what does that message look like? What messages can we send to each other? You know, yeah, what kinds of things do we include in those messages? What kind of responses do we expect from those messages? It's just standardizing that. So how an API works is that you send a request to, so an application would send a request for data or for some action to be done on its behalf, and it waits for a response. So the other application sends back the requested data or performs that action. So for example, a surfing website, just to get that client server terminology. So if you had a surf website, that would be the client, and it would need to make a call to a weather service. That would be the server, to get information to use to suggest what days are best for surfing and which locations you'll be able to find the best waves today. So The client is the entity that wants information or needs something to happen, and the server is the entity that provides that information or performs the task. So it's just saying we have two different systems. On the one side, we have the client who wants something done on its behalf. On the other side, we have a server who is able to do this thing. And an API is just how do these two systems talk to each other? So Open Payments is an API standard. It's also a RESTful API, which we're going to cover on the next slide. But when I say that it's a standard, that basically means we're talking about words on a page. And as I said, you have a client that's making requests to a server. So for instance, our client might be a music place application, and that server might be an account servicing entity. And the music place client application would like to retrieve some payment details. And what the API standard does is it defines, well, what information is needed in that request. For instance, a wallet address, a quote ID, some metadata. Doesn't matter exactly what all of these fields mean right now. It would say what type those fields are. So are we expecting them to be strings or objects or Boolean, so like true or false values? Are we expecting them to be numbers? And then usually an explanation of what that field is so that it's a little bit more human understandable to everyone trying to implement and understand the standard. It also specifies that some fields are required. So for instance, in this example, the wallet address and quote ID would be required. Usually ID fields typically are required so that they can pinpoint exact resources. And then there's often optional fields as well. So for instance, the metadata field here, can be included if it's needed for a particular use case that requires additional information, but it can also be left out in simpler use cases that don't need that. Okay, so Open Payments is not only this API standard, but it's also a RESTful API. So for those of you who don't know REST, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about the definition, but it's a representational state transfer. Basically, what we're talking about here is code. Okay, so everything in REST is a resource. And if we go back to the Surf website example, resources would be things like locations or weather. Okay, so in an open payments world, like where a payment gets made, then our resources would be things like quotes or payments or, whatever. Okay. So the big thing that you do need to understand about REST is that it's stateless. Okay, so this simply means that the server does not store any client context between requests, which means that you must include whatever details are needed in that request you make. So, for example, when you want information about these things or resources, the server doesn't store any specific information about who you are. It doesn't necessarily even need to know who you are. So if you need to see a quote, that you'll give the server that quote's ID so it knows which quote to return to you. It doesn't care if you generated the quote or if you're the customer receiving the quote. It only needs to know, for example, that it was asked for that particular quote and whether or not you have permission to access that resource. So RESTful APIs, basically you want to be including all the information because you're going to assume rightly that the server doesn't know anything about you. It does not have context, so you have to provide all the context. Okay, the kinds of requests that you're going to be making in a REST API would be common GET requests, so you want to retrieve information about a resource, POST requests, which means you want to make a new thing, so like a new payment or a new quote. Okay, you're going to be adding something to a database somewhere on the server, a put request or a patch request to update or partially update resources, or a delete request to remove a resource. Okay, so Open Payments, right? It enables direct payment integration between applications and users' accounts. It is an API standard, it's a RESTful API, and it requires account servicing entities to create Open Payments enabled accounts. And it also then requires, like I've been saying, this whole protocol suite is about the piping. It's about sending these payment instructions. So it's not actually sending money. So we require a common payment rail between the two ASEs. So who uses open payments? Okay, I just wanted to break this down into the two different perspectives. On the one side, you have third-party applications who call the open payments APIs, and on the other side, you have the ASEs who implement the open standards. And these are the two users. Remember, I said you've got like the client and the server. So the third-party application would be the client, and the ASE that has implemented the open payments would be the server. Okay, so the client wants things. It wants to know how much is this payment going to cost once we've added fees. So it wants like to get information about a quote, or the client wants to send money from bank A to bank B. It can't do it itself. So that's what the server does, which is the ASE in this instance. Okay, so third-party applications are going to make these API calls, okay? And they then use open payments to interact with customer accounts. So that's how they get direct access to customer accounts. It means that these apps can connect to any ASE using open payments without custom integration. So once you've enabled this open payments API, you can talk to any ASE who uses this open payments API. So that standardization just means that the integration barrier is significantly lower. So for example, to send a request to make a quote for a customer who wants to download a song. So like I said, that would be like a GET request to get information that you do not have from a server that has that information. Okay, on the other side, so if you are an ASE, so you are an account servicing entity, you're someone who's managing accounts, you're someone who's like registered, licensed financial service provider, something like that, then you have a bit more work on your side, which is to actually write the code to implement the functionality behind these API requests. So for instance, if a request is received to make a quote, that means that now the server needs to actually be able to make that quote, okay? So you need code that can gather all the necessary information. It can calculate any additional fees that are going to happen. It can determine the validity period of this quote. It can add a new entry to the database. Okay, so that's how this looks, sort of depending which perspective you're looking at it from. So when an ASE implements open payments, their customers' accounts become open payment enabled, just so you also understand that terminology. Okay, so now we actually get to start diving into our example, and hopefully all these lofty ideas start kind of settling down a little bit into something more tangible. Okay, so let's start with a really basic who's who here, okay? And we'll expand on this later. I'm going to do sort of a higher level explanation, and then we're going to go into a deep dive in our next section. Okay, so the who's who for now, we have customers who are our end users. We have a client, and that's an application that processes payments by making these open payments API requests. And we have some account servicing entities, okay? And these are the ones who are managing their customers' accounts and have also implemented that open payment standard. So in our example, we have a marketplace. Well, let's start with the customers. We have our customers, Alice and Bob Marley. Okay, you may know him. And our client application is going to be a music store. Okay, I think Spotify kind of scene, right? And then our ASEs, we're going to have two. So Alice has some kind of digital wallet and Bob is using a bank. Okay, now to get everything set up and started, Bob is going to add his song to this music place application. And he obviously wants royalties for his music. And so he provides a wallet address to be paid when someone downloads the song. Okay, so what is a wallet address? Every open payments account is identified by one or more URLs. That's a wallet address. Okay, so a wallet address is a URL. And the reason that it's a URL is, first of all, it sort of gives us a format to make this into something human readable. And then also it actually acts as a service endpoint, which is why it is a URL. So you can actually send a GET request to this URL to be like, hey, what are you? And it'll be like, oh, I'm a wallet address, and this is the public information that you need to know about me. Okay, so, and we'll get into the details of that information later, but it's sort of, for now, just understand that this is a really great entry point into the system because you have a wallet address that is human readable and publicly shareable. So not only does this identify your account, but if you as an application want to do anything with that account, you can immediately make a GET request to this wallet address that you've just been given, and it will kind of tell you what to do next and where to send requests and all the rest. So when I said open payments is a RESTful API, and I said it's stateless, this is the point. Someone can give you a wallet address and you can make a call to find out more information about where to go from there, because the system doesn't have any context of who you are. So it's really great if you already have an endpoint that you can hit immediately to kind of get those next steps to move forward. Okay, so the payer and the payee must both have wallet addresses in order to interact using open payments. Okay, let's get back to our example. Alice adds Bob's song to her cart on Music Place. Okay, and she provides her wallet address in order to pay for the song using open payments. So this is the step now where we're entering the open payments realm. Okay, because at this point now, open payments has these two wallet addresses. It has someone trying to make a transaction. And so this is where we kick off our flow, which if you see on the left, we have some grant requests, we have some create some new resources and blah, blah. We're going to go through it step by step. So the first step here is grant request incoming payment. Okay. So Music Place requests a grant to create an incoming payment on Bob's account at his bank. And we're going to go break that down. First of all, what is a grant? Okay, so for our grants, we are using GNAP, which is the Grant Negotiation and Authorization Protocol. So clients must receive grants before issuing any payment instructions. So it's basically grants give those client applications authorization via access tokens to perform operations. So obviously, when we're talking about money, we need security, right? And so what these grants are doing is saying, like, a little bit like, who are you? Should you be here at all? So before you can actually do anything on someone's account, even if that is giving them money, you actually need to make sure that, like, is this money real? Is it coming from like a legitimate source? Like, what's happening? So you have all of these setups in place, which the top layer on that is grants to kind of say, okay, you have authorization, I will give you an access token and you can perform these operations. All requests also require signatures, which protect the integrity of these requests. So these signatures are generated according to the HTTP signatures specification. And what's really cool about GNAP, which is sort of very similar to OAuth, if for those of you who have heard of OAuth, but GNAP makes it possible to give account holders like specific fine-grained control over the permissions that they grant, including control over the amounts of transactions, sometimes with time-based transactions, sort of you can say like how long should this be valid, or if there are going to be repeated payments, you can also say like what is the velocity of those payments allowed to be. So for instance, you can only take money out of my account once a month, or you can take money out of my account once a week, so you can sort of limit like how often am I giving someone access. So it's all these fine-grained details. That's why we've gone with GNAP. It's a really interesting protocol that sort of just gives a little bit more handling. And again, like we actually want to give that end user control, right? And that's part of transparency. That's where trust is built. It's users, I think, should have this power, but also with that isn't just saying, oh yeah, give this person access to my account. I think there's a lot more trust if you get to say, yeah, you can give this person to my account once, only now, only up to 500 Rand, and that's it. Or actually, this is a subscription and you can give this person access to my account, but only once a month and only up to 500 Rand. So, that makes you trust the system more, right? Because those things, there's sort of checks and balances in place. Okay, so if you remember, Music Place was sending a grant to Bob's ASE to create an incoming payment. So what is an incoming payment resource? Okay, and an incoming payment is basically, it begins the process of like setting up a payment between these two entities. So when it's created, the payee, so that would be Bob, the person receiving money, his ASE returns unique payment details to the client, which is the application, that can be used to address payments to the account. So basically, it's saying, okay, there's someone who wants to send you money. Will you please tell me what exactly, what payment details I should send back to them? And these payment details, like it says, are unique to this specific payment. Okay, so the grant was successful. Bob's bank said, yeah, sure, we will accept your payment, and it sent back the specific details. Next step is that the Music Place application, now that it has this permission, can actually create that incoming payment. So it's going to do that also on Bob's account. And like I said, incoming payment just means it's saying, hey, Bob, Alice wants to send you money. And Bob's like, great, okay. Then we have another grant request coming in. So this time, the Music Place application is sending a grant request to create a quote on Alice's ASE, or her digital wallet provider. So now it's saying to Alice, like, looks like you want to make a payment. This is how much that payment is. Well, we want to start the process of telling you how much the payment is going to cost. Because, for instance, maybe Alice didn't make this request, so obviously you need these checks in place. Okay, so what is a quote? After an incoming payment is created on the payee's account, a quote must be created on the payer's account. Okay, so basically it's just saying, once Bob's bank has been alerted that there's an incoming payment and it's sent through those payment details, then Alice's account needs to give permission to create a quote. Okay, and that quote is to indicate how much the transaction will cost, because transactions often have additional fees, whether that is transaction fees or whether that is currency exchange fees or whatever the case may be. The last thing we want is to surprise a user with how much money actually comes out of their account. So the quote is to make sure that everyone is agreement upfront who's getting what at the end of the day, and again to add some transparency about what fees are involved in that. Okay, so the quote is a commitment from the payer's ASE to deliver that amount to the payee's ASE. Okay, so also important to note that a quote is only valid for a limited time frame. All right, so now we've got the grant to create the quote. Now we can actually create the quote. So Music Place does that at Alice's digital wallet provider. And then once the quote has been created, then the Music Place application can send through another request to Alice's digital wallet to say, hey, can we create an outgoing payment? Okay, so what is an outgoing payment? And so open payments requires the payer to explicitly consent to the creation of an outgoing payment. Okay, this is different from the other grants, which things are actually happening automatically. So there's no end user involvement. Like Alice didn't have to say yes or no, can we create a quote on your account? And Bob didn't have to say to his bank, like, yes, you can accept an incoming payment from someone. These grants are based on a system level where outgoing payments, this is now actually an instruction. This is creating an instruction to take money out of your account. So this requires end users to get involved and say yes or no. What are they, was this actually them at the end of the day making this? Are they sure they trust the parties involved? Are they okay with the prices? Like, this is the final, are we going ahead with this? Okay, so consent is obtained this time through an interactive grant. And the outgoing payment serves as an instruction to make a payment from the payer's account. The request to create the outgoing payment includes the payee's wallet address. So basically, the ASC needs to know, well, where are we sending this money when we take it out of your account, as well as the quote ID, which contains all of the other payments, amounts, and information that is required. Okay, so as you'll see here, we've reached the continuation request, and this is that interactive grant that I spoke about. So Alice's wallet provider is now talking directly to her to approve the payment. And this is basically, in flows where you make payments online and then you get a pop-up on your phone saying, oh, did you really want to send this much money to this and this application? So this is now outside of Music Plays, the application. This is now direct communication between an end user and their bank or their digital wallet or whoever it is that they are trusting with their money. Okay, so Alice indeed decides she will approve this payment because she really wants to download this Bob Marley song. And in that case, Music Place is able to create that outgoing payment now that that interactive grant has gone through successfully. And so it does that. And at this point, payments can be sent from Alice's account at her wallet provider to Bob's account at his bank. And we have success. I just want to zoom in on that dotted line for a moment. Okay, so the depiction of money moving between the payee and the payer is happening below the open payments layer. So I just wanted to remind you, this is what the Interledger protocol suite looks like. We're dealing with open payments there at the top. When we look at stream, ILP, BTP, ILP over HTTP, all of that is not transferring money. When we look at the bottom, that settlement layer is transferring money. Right now, when we're looking at that dotted line, we're kind of just looking at all of those protocols that are listed under open payments. They're handling all those details for us. So open payments results, it's an abstraction layer, okay? So you can issue payment instructions between transacting parties on top of any payment method. Right now, Interledger is the only payment method that really integrates very easily with the system. So those open payments calls result in payment instructions. We still need a way to get that instruction back to the settlement entity, and that's what the other protocols are handling. So the ILP protocols can break up those payment instructions into smaller packets and send them over the network and handle all of the network-related issues that can pop up when dealing with these mechanisms. So we don't need to worry about any of that at the open payments layer. And finally, Alice can download Bob's music. So we have success at the end. All right, so I just wanted to cover now, how would this example have looked if we did not have open payments? And this is sort of from the client application perspective. So if you are an app and someone gives you their bank account or their credit card info, like, you can't actually do anything with it. Even if they come to you and they say, please take my money, I want your product, like, you're not authorized. You do not have access to that bank system or that digital wallet system. It doesn't matter if the client wants you to take their money, you simply can't do it. So you either need to use a payment processor like Stripe or PayPal, which means you're adding in a middleman. Perhaps there's going to be fees. Perhaps there's going to be delays that come into that. Or otherwise, you'd actually be building an application that is a payment processor, and then you could integrate directly with banks. But I mean, this comes with enormous technical complexity and compliance complexity. So it's really nice to kind of have an abstraction layer on top of that that allows you not to worry about those things. And yeah, if you are going to be acting as a financial entity who is processing payments, you're also going to end up storing really sensitive financial data, which involves significant risks as well. So the advantages then of using open payments is that users, they have fine-grained control over what permission they're giving third parties, as we'll cover in the next section. They can grant access for limited amounts of funds, or when allowing an entity to make repeated withdrawals, they can specify how often that entity is allowed to do that, as we said. Basically, with open payments, you're not limited to any specific payment methods or providers. You just kind of, once you are using open payments, then you have access to everyone who's using open payments. And that standardization makes integration so much easier. So this alone can lead to cheaper transactions. This also can hopefully remove middlemen in cases where they're not adding, innate value. Basically, open payments separates the clearance of transactions with the actual settlement of transactions. So hopefully you can also lower cost if you kind of settle in, you'll probably have predefined settlement windows. And if you can sum that up and make a bulk settlement, you're not kind of settling every score individually. That can also reduce overhead and fees. And yeah, with ILP and open payments, you're introducing more competition into the ecosystem, and that should also lower fees. Then by separating payment instructions from payment execution or settlement, it means that app developers can include payment functionality without registering as a licensed financial service provider. And luckily, you do not need to store any sensitive information, which just makes your life as a developer significantly easier. Okay, so that is the run through of everything open payments. And then in the next section, we're going to start diving deeper into what's happening behind the scenes, the other entities that are involved, and we'll slowly start unpicking our way through this. But I'm hoping by now you have a picture of what Interledger is, how open payments fits into that, and what open payments makes possible.